Good morning and welcome to our 2025 legislative session recap with the Indy Star Statehouse team. I'm Caitlin Lang, government and politics editor at Indy Star. I'm here with our two Statehouse reporters, Kayla Dwyer and Brittany Carloni, and our government accountability reporter, Haley Colombo. We're going to be talking about a session which just ended last night around 1:30 a.m., so we're a little tired, but we are here to give you the latest news on what bills are on Governor Mike Braun's desk, the biggest headlines of session, and to talk to you about what didn't cross the finish line. So for starters, I want to ask you all, what is one bill that Hoosiers should know about that passed this legislative session? It may not be, whether or not Braun signed it into law already. Kayla, let's start with you.
Yes, so obviously healthcare, cost of healthcare has been a huge discussion for years now. It's pretty difficult to pass bills that do things that Hoosiers will notice in the marketplace. But there are two very specific things in two of the priority bills this session that I think people will notice and I think are really interesting. In House Bill 1004, let me start with 1003. There's a provision that says if you go to your doctor's office in like a office park, like not a hospital setting, often hospitals have been, or the hospital networks that own those physician offices have been tacking on an institutional fee to your bills. And that really adds to the cost of healthcare. So this bill now says they can't do that. So you should look at the line items in your bill and make sure that that's not happening.
Yeah, I go to the doctors a lot now because I have a 10-month-old, so
yeah.
I'm curious to see if this helps ease my pain any.
Maybe, yeah, they really can't do it anymore. So, and then the other little minute thing that I think matters a lot for transparency and knowing what you're paying for, insurance agents are now going to be, in 1004, are now going to be required when they give you a quote to include what their commission is, what they're earning on this transaction. And they also have to disclose that to the all-payer claims database, which was a database that lawmakers created 2 sessions ago, I think. It's online, you can Google it, it's there. So that will, transparency can go a little bit of ways to try to cut down on prices because people have to be honest about what they're charging.
My understanding, though, is that the healthcare cost-cutting legislation was watered down some. Is that accurate?
Yeah. This happened, it feels like deja vu. This happened in 23 as well. Starting out with trying to hit nonprofit hospitals with these strict penalties for not reaching certain price benchmarks or charging below those benchmarks. The same thing, it started out the same way this year. And even actually threatening the revocation of their nonprofit status if they don't charge below a certain benchmark. Obviously, you start a negotiation at a high point and hope to get somewhere, right? But this year, it ended up turning into another let's study it bill. But I will say after 4 years in 2029 is when the threat of revoking nonprofit status would kick in if hospitals don't bring their prices down to a certain average that the Office of Management and Budget will determine through the study that this bill asks for. So and even that divided Republicans, the prospect of that coming down the pike 4 years from now was very divisive, especially in the Senate.
I assume just because of the whole free market argument.
It's a free market argument, but also specifically the revocation of the nonprofit status is very concerning to a lot of folks because there's a lot of community engagement that comes with the nonprofit status. Hospitals do charity care. They take in people regardless of their ability to pay. There's this thing called community benefits, though of course the definition of that is often disputed. But at any rate, there's ways that they try to give back to the communities that a lot of lawmakers are really concerned would be lost if they turn into for-profit hospitals.
If I can jump in with a question,
yes.
I'm curious, especially watching some of the debate on 1004 and how watered down that got from how they came out swinging at the start. Obviously, healthcare. You've written about how healthcare is a big issue for Governor Braun. Do you think he's going to like where 1004 specifically went?
Braun is not shy about calling out the fact that there are special interests that weigh in heavily here, specifically the hospital lobby, and I think he will think or say something to the effect of, "I told you so." That being said, I do think it's not like nefarious 100% per se. It's like there has been change in leadership at the Hospital Association, and I do think like some lawmakers have expressed on the floor, like, we appreciate that it's like a 180-degree turn. They're actually willing to be partners and cooperative in how we move forward with this. And I think that does also go some way with legislators. Like, okay, if you're going to actually cooperate with us, we will do a give and take and, be reasonable.
Brittany, I'll ask you, what is one bill that you think Hoosiers should know about from this session?
So I know we'll get into property taxes later, but especially as I watch some of these like very controversial bills get passed yesterday and like the marathon day that we had yesterday, I think one Hoosiers should know about is Senate Bill 287, which was the bill to make school board races partisan. And people might not know this, but currently school board races, you don't have a D or an R or an L if you're a libertarian next to your name, and that might not seem like that's real because, especially in our suburban communities, school board races, I think in the past years following the COVID pandemic, like they've gotten more political, but the bill that squeaked through the Senate yesterday on like I think it was a 26-24 vote, which
that
as
doesn't
we know,
usually happen. Yeah.
I know, with a Republican supermajority in the Senate, like that's not a vote that you see on a regular basis. But that bill is on the way to Governor Braun, and I mean, he was a school board member, as like Kayla's written about before. So I mean, it'll be up to him to decide whether to sign that. But I'm a lot of people that, as I listened to testimony, I know Kayla wrote quite a bit about it as well, were concerned that it would just like further politicize education and the boards that like make decisions for school districts, while the people who were in support of it were just saying like, we're already there, this is a transparency issue. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what Braun does with that and what kind of impact that has on like communities across the states where schools and school boards are like a really big deal.
Yeah, I do wonder if it makes it more appealing to him that it's, I believe the provision about if you don't want to have a Republican or Democrat next to your name, you can opt not to, correct?
Yeah.
So I wonder if that will make it more appealing to him.
I mean, that's a great question. There was a lot of debate yesterday, and I know Kayla has written about this too, about the Hatch Act. And I wish I could describe to you like word for word what that is, but like I think if I remember correctly, it's like government employee, like if you're a government employee, political activity is not exact, those things don't kind of intertwine when you're like a federal government employee, and that there was a lot of concerns about whether people who are federal government employees could actually run for school boards and put partisan markers next to your name. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. A lot of Republicans, as the bill like got final passage in the Senate yesterday, who voted against the bill, were really worried that this might weed out good candidates and people who just want to run and don't want to put a political marker next to their name.
Right. Okay. Haley, what about you? What is one bill that you think we should all be watching or we should know about?
Okay, so those were very important, and I will say mine is that you can now drive faster on I-465.
I think that's the most important. I don't know. As someone who takes 465.
Like in impacting our day-to-day lives, okay, I'm gonna be honest, I did not know the speed limit was 55. But now it's 65, which seems a little bit more reasonable.
I mean, that's what most people drive on. Like,
Sorry,
don't pull me over on my way home today, please.
I know, seriously. So I think that, has a big impact on people's everyday lives. And then as well as the fact that Governor Braun, he now has a little bit, it's easier for him to enact tolling on other roads in the state. So I think that will be really interesting as a mechanism to potentially raise money to, maintain the state's roads, but also, controversial because people don't like paying tolls. So I'm fascinated to see where that will go. I know, Kayla, you wrote about that.
Yeah,
Do you
I heard one lawmaker say like 65 and 70 seem like good candidates, and
Right.
and that's true because there's a lot of truck traffic, and 65 goes all the way up to Chicago. That's definitely within 75 miles of the existing toll road, which I think is why they wanted to get rid of the limitation of you can't put another toll road within 75 miles of an existing toll road, which is what you were saying. It makes it easier for them to do that.
I mean, yeah, I assume they won't touch 465, would be my guess, because, I mean, a lot of 465 is
never
local
know.
commuters.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
Yes.
that's gonna be really interesting. But I mean, you also take 65 and 70 just living in Indianapolis.
Right.
So I
100%.
assume that they want to go after the non-commuters, right? But
Yeah.
not go after, but get revenue from. So that I am really interested to see like what actually happens with that. And then another part of that bill is just giving some extra tools to local communities to, make it easier for them to maintain their roads. And my understanding too is that Indianapolis will benefit from that.
right.
And I will just caution that with the tolling, they would still need a waiver from the federal government, and that process could take, I don't know, years. So we're not going to see tolls tomorrow.
You won't see toll, yeah.
That's
some
important to
time.
get out there.
Those are all really important bills. One of the other ones that you mentioned earlier, Brittany, was the property tax relief. I know that ended up turning into a massive bill that did a lot more than just property tax relief. Can you tell us what the bill did? In a quick and dirty way, yeah.
So over the course of the session, each chamber and each step it took, it just grew by like hundreds of pages. And I think the final version that Governor Braun signed was about 350 pages.
Was that longer than the budget?
It
Yes.
was, yeah, 100% longer than the budget. And another sign that this bill grew beyond just what was Governor Braun's initial plan for property tax relief is when the bill was finally amended in the House to get, as it got toward the end of this process, it changed from property tax relief to local government finance because the bill essentially, what it does now is it essentially limits how much local governments and school corporations can take in or can raise in property taxes. It does provide property tax credits to homeowners for your 2026 taxes based on what your 2025 assessments are, but it goes beyond that to also include capabilities for cities and towns to raise local income taxes. It includes business equipment tax exemptions, which got some changes yesterday.
Which is
very
like
last minute.
laptops,
Yeah,
that
furniture,
sort of
computers,
big equipment.
Lawmakers said that those specifications might help small businesses who don't maybe necessarily have hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment, but they could potentially be exempted under the specifications in the law. And then there were also pieces about charter school and public school district property tax sharing that got fit in there. There's even a small provision about the eventual dissolving of the Union School Corporation up near Muncie. It was a massive bill.
Yeah, yes, very. I guess the bottom line, though, is regular Hoosiers can see, what is it, 200?
So
200, 300?
This has been the challenge of this whole process is everyone's property tax bill.
Just give me the max, though.
Yes.
What's the max of what I could see?
I mean, if your property tax bill is about, say, $2,000 based on all the various calculations, you can get up to 10% off your bill next year. So if your bill is about $2,000, you would get about $200 off of your bill. There are other various groups around the state, like disabled veterans and seniors and groups like that can take off additional credits and relief, but it's pretty complicated.
Yeah, but the alternative is, as you're pointing out, that some local communities
Exactly.
might need to find that money elsewhere, and they
Yes.
can turn towards this other tool.
And that was the big part. That was the biggest debate of this session, is that any action that state lawmakers or Governor Braun take on property tax relief or property tax reform, property taxes do not go to the state government in any shape or form. That is the biggest, probably one of the biggest revenue sources for local governments and school districts. And because of the rising assessments and property values in recent years, Hoosiers have seen these skyrocketing property values, and property taxes became a big issue for Governor Braun on the campaign trail. But yes, the bill itself, based on what Governor Braun signed on April 15th, projects hundreds of millions of dollars in, as what lawmakers say, a decrease in the increase of what they'll grow in the coming years.
Right.
So like, their school districts and local governments, their revenues will grow in the coming years, but it won't be to the extent that they may have had if this bill didn't get passed. And that was a giant concern for some of these communities where property taxes is a big revenue generator.
Right.
Does this mean, though, that your property taxes could go down $200, but your community could raise your income tax by $200?
Right.
That is the other side of
Or
this
if you
debate.
don't own a home, then just straight up income tax increase.
Yeah,
Right.
that is like one of the things that I chuckled at as they were kind of wrapping up this bill. I think it was Senator Scott Baldwin up in Noblesville was like, this is a complicated issue and it needs a complicated solution. And I know,
So here's your 300-page bill.
yes, but that was also part of the issue, is like people just did not understand the massive implications of like what this would actually do, just because it was so complicated.
Right. Now, we saw Governor Mike Braun and his Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith kind of butt heads on this issue. Beckwith actually called on Braun to veto the legislation, which obviously Braun signed it. He didn't veto it. I'm curious, they have kind of a interesting relationship. Beckwith was not Braun's choice. Were there any other parts of session, Haley, I'll ask you, that you noticed that they maybe weren't on the same page, or were even more butting heads, aside from the property tax stuff?
Well, honestly, just yesterday, actually, the governor had a press conference about reining in the IEDC and doing more transparency there with the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, and I asked Governor Braun about a story that we did about Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith signing a no-bid contract with a law firm that's close to his church.
Where he's still the pastor.
Where he's still the pastor, so his other job. And Governor Braun did not come to his defense whatsoever, and in fact suggested that maybe lawmakers next year take a look at doing something about that contract or similar ones like it. So they certainly, between property taxes and just kind of the day-to-day, that relationship grows, I think, just even more interesting to observe.
Right.
And I'm sure the players in that relationship would describe it differently, but as political observers, it is genuinely fascinating.
Because it's weird, that's not normally the relationship between, the governor and his number two.
We've not even seen them do stuff together this whole session.
Yeah, not necessarily.
Besides the property tax rally.
That's
right,
true.
right, right.
So,
I think they were also at Governor Braun and some of the Trump administration did the rollout of the Make Indiana Healthy Again.
Yeah, they were both there.
So I think Braun and
Never
Beckwith
mind.
were at that one. But still, to your point, they're not at many events together.
And
So.
but even specifically in the property tax debate, Governor Braun, from what I could see, he really leaned into some of the WIBC radio hosts that were really pushing for major property tax reform that Micah Beckwith is very friendly with and goes on their program very frequently. And Lieutenant Governor Beckwith was the initial probably headliner of that property tax rally in March, and Governor Braun joined as well. And they all appeared to be on the same issue, but once Governor Braun they appeared to be on the same page, but once Governor Braun reached a deal with House lawmakers about where the property tax bill was going to go, the lieutenant governor came out with a statement saying that he wanted Braun to veto the bill.
Right, yeah.
And basically said it was like way too complicated for Hoosiers to understand.
Right.
And,
I want to get to some other issues though,
sorry.
aside from property.
Sorry.
You can tell Brittany loves
I
property
know,
tax.
I know. I'm so sorry.
We all have our pet issues, as you can see. But yes, I do want to get to other topics like the budget.
Yes.
You know, Kayla, there were some last-minute additions added to that. Can you talk us through real quickly what some of those were?
Yeah, this is really fascinating. At the very end of the bill, again, 220 pages, just a very substantive policy decision to sort of step into how universities run themselves. This was within the last 24 hours, well, I guess 36 hours. You know, so not only giving Governor Braun appointing power for the entire Board of Trustees for Indiana University, whereas he appoints 5 members now, but removing the process of alumni electing their own alumni representatives on the board. It's now just all 9 are just who Braun would pick. But also stepping into rewriting tenure yet again. Remember 202 last year? Was that last year or the year before?
That was 2024, yeah, last year.
Oh my goodness. 202 also stepped into faculty tenure by essentially holding them to intellectual diversity as like a condition of tenure, right? And this is doing something, adding productivity quotas and reviews to faculty that already have tenure, and saying if you don't meet certain productivity benchmarks, like how many students you graduate, how many hours of instructional time you're doing, you could be subject to probation or firing. I mean, this tenure is
this portion did not get a hearing. This was dropped into the budget sort of last minute.
Right, absolutely zero public testimony opportunity. I mean, if this were a bill, this would have been torn to shreds. I mean, it would have been like lots of testimony. People come to the Statehouse.
202 in 2024, just there were, I feel like hundreds of people that came over the course of like hearings. So
what about there? I know there was another provision that maybe was, you know, lawmakers were less shy about sharing a tax increase.
Oh yes, that's probably the more important for the average person. The cigarette tax is going up to $3 a pack, folks. So. Get them while you can. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. That's the opposite message. No. Listen, it's so interesting. This is something that has been attempted for many years.
We're all gonna lose our jobs.
No, it's called sarcasm, you guys. That's actually the point. Is in addition to raising revenue, it can discourage people from smoking. So they couldn't find enough cuts to quite meet that $2 billion revenue gap that was discovered in last week's revenue forecast. So they turned to raise $800 million roughly from raising tobacco taxes. So a longtime policy goal of the Indiana Chamber and the American Cancer Society, and it took a $2 billion shortfall, but they got it.
Right. What about, this isn't budget related, but marijuana. This comes up every year. There's tons of bills filed. They don't go anywhere. Brittany, I believe what did we see on marijuana this year? I believe there was one bill that crossed the line.
So I always think about at the end of last year, there was the Ball State Hoosier survey. It shows basically that a majority of Hoosiers want some form of legal marijuana, whether it's medical or recreational. State lawmakers this year decided to ban marijuana advertising by any medium. Any medium, any medium.
So they went in kind of the opposite direction a little bit.
Yes, and Kayla wrote a lot about this during session, but this kind of falls, I think, unfortunately for a lot of people who are really hoping this might be a year for momentum. I mean, Governor Braun on the campaign trail last year signaled he was open to medical marijuana. There was a new Republican-led lobbying group that formed earlier this year and was supporting a legalization bill. And like all of our neighbors surrounding states have some form of legalization. But yes, lawmakers went a completely opposite direction. And another interesting thing that didn't get a committee hearing because this language appeared in other bills at the start of the year that died, and then in the last week it just started bill hopping from bill to bill, and it got passed in a bill that gave all sorts of directions and clarifications to the BMV, the Bureau of Motor Vehicles.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how it goes this time of year.
Yeah. You never know where bill language is going to land. We do have to wrap up soon. I feel like we could talk for
Forever.
2 hours about all these issues. So feel free to reach out to us, give us story ideas of other legislation that you think we should be writing about. I want to end on this note, the biggest winners and losers from the legislative session. Haley, start with you. Biggest winner, biggest loser.
Oh man. Let's see. Why'd you start with me?
I'm sorry. Okay, Kayla. We'll go to Kayla first. So we'll see if she has an answer.
I'll start with the loser. Public health. We made this historic investment in 2023, and when it came time to find $2 billion to plug of a hole, public health got one of the biggest cuts, from $200 million over the biennium to $80 million over the biennium, more than half. And so that's kind of going a different direction from where we were going before. Winner, well, I guess those advocacy groups who wanted the cigarette tax, they won something. Really
after
big.
years of trying.
After years,
yeah.
yeah.
All right, Brittany, what about you? Biggest loser and winner?
In some way, I feel like you could put transparency as a winner and a loser, but in very different, nuanced ways. I mean, Kayla wrote quite a bit about, and Haley wrote quite a bit about several efforts about just making sure that statewide elected officials like the Secretary of State and the Lieutenant Governor are being more transparent about their travel expenses and various things like that. But I do think that based on the, and I don't want to say shenanigans, but shenanigans of the last week of session where like these major policy changes are being thrown in at the last minute with little testimony, I feel like transparency is a loser as well, because a lot of Hoosiers won't get a say in some of these giant things that happened in these last couple of days.
Yeah, I think we'll still be figuring out like next week what we missed in the legislation.
100%.
All right, Haley, I gave you extra time. You're winner and loser.
There's so many. Okay, so I feel like folks who want to send their kids to private school and have the state chip into paying tuition costs, so using school vouchers. Those folks are winners.
Because they did universal school choice in the second year of the budget.
And in fact, that means the wealthiest families that want to do that, they're winners. I think charter schools are winners because they got the property tax sharing that they were asking for. I think, let's see, like, libraries and public media are losers, and
lost all of its funding.
Public broadcasting.
Public broadcasting stations lost all of their funding.
And that was a last minute provision too in the budget that I completely forgot to talk about.
So and I think average Hoosiers are going to, they might not be winners or losers at the end of this, because, kind of harkening back to property taxes, it's like they might see some relief, in property taxes, but they might see an income tax increase, they might feel a little bit relief with their, medical bills, but the, cigarettes, taxes are going up. So it's just, it's
a mix.
It's a mixed bag.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you for joining us on your lunch break as we provided a recap of the 2025 legislative session. Again, I'm Caitlin Lang, Politics and Government Editor at Indy Star, here with Kayla Dwyer, Brittany Carloni, and Haley Colombo. Thanks.